Welcome to Wisdom for the Present, where we take ancient truth and bring it into clear, modern understanding. This episode uses AI-generated narration based on human-researched and written material. So I want you to imagine, just for a second, that you walk into your annual performance review.
Oh, everyone's favorite time of the year.
Right, exactly. So you sit down across from your boss, and they look you dead in the eye and say, to get this promotion, you need to stop trying so hard. In fact, your new strategy is to actively do nothing, blend into the background, and make sure nobody notices your achievements.
Wow. Yeah, I think most people would assume they're being fired right on the spot.
Right, or at least being quietly pushed out the door. Because the entire operating system of our modern life screams the exact opposite. It's all about, stand out, grind harder, claim your credit, optimize every single waking second.
Yeah, that's the hustle culture playbook, cover to cover.
Exactly. But what if our modern operating system has a massive fatal bug in it? What if we've been running the wrong software this whole time?
That is precisely the question we're tackling today. We are exploring the first 10 chapters of a text that fundamentally diagnoses the total exhaustion of the modern world. And the crazy part is, it was written over 2 millennia ago.
Yeah, the Tao Te Ching.
Yes. And, it's wild how accurately it describes our current burnout epidemic.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive is highly specific. We aren't just doing a dry historical overview here. We want to act as your guides to extract the raw, practical, and honestly, sometimes deeply uncomfortable wisdom from this text.
Because it is definitely uncomfortable at times.
Oh, completely. We want to figure out how these ancient paradoxes can actually become functional tools for you, for your life, your career, and your peace of mind today.
Yeah, and to do that, it's going to require checking a lot of our cultural assumptions at the door. Because this text, it challenges the very bedrock of how we perceive success, action, and even reality itself.
It really does not pull any punches.
No, not at all. So, to grasp the practical tools, I think we have to start by understanding how the author frames the universe we're actually operating in.
Yeah, and I noticed this right away when reading the opening lines. It feels like the text is almost daring you to put it down.
It's a very bold opening.
It starts with this famous, almost frustrating riddle. It says, the Tao that can be trodden is not the enduring and unchanging Tao. The name that can be named is not the enduring and unchanging name.
Yeah, the classic opening.
It basically opening a book by saying, hey, whatever I write in this book is already fundamentally inaccurate. Feels like a massive disclaimer, right?
It absolutely is a profound philosophical disclaimer. The author is drawing this hard, unyielding boundary between language and reality.
Like putting it on the wall right on page 1.
Exactly, because the word Tao is generally translated as the way, right? It points toward the ultimate reality, the underlying rhythm and source of the universe. The text even calls it the originator of heaven and earth when it's nameless.
Okay, so it's the big, overarching reality of everything.
Yes. But the psychological mechanism the author is really highlighting here is how the human brain uses language. The moment we assign a label to something, the moment we name it, we shrink it.
Yeah. Oh, that makes sense. We compress it.
Right. We compress an infinite reality into a tiny, manageable cognitive box so our brains can handle it.
It reminds me of trying to explain a truly overwhelming experience to someone, like standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon, trying to explain that to someone who has never left a city.
Oh, that's a perfect analogy.
You can use words like vast or red or deep or breathtaking, but those words are just like tiny little pointers. If the person just sits there and analyzes the dictionary definition of the word vast, they haven't experienced the canyon at all.
No, not even close.
The word isn't the reality. It's just the menu, not the meal.
Yeah, that is a highly accurate way to conceptualize it. The author is warning us that when we fall in love with our labels and our categories, we actually lose touch with the enduring reality.
We get stuck on the menu.
Exactly. We start interacting with our rigid definitions of the world rather than the world itself. And this limitation of language, this perception trap, it sets up the core mechanic of human suffering, which the text introduces right after that.
Right, the whole trap of relativity and duality. This part, honestly, it completely rewired how I think about my own judgments.
It's a heavy hitter for sure.
Because the text points out, and I'll quote it, all in the world know the beauty of the beautiful. And in doing this, they have the idea of what ugliness is. It goes on to say that existence and non-existence give birth to each other. Difficulty and ease produce each other. Long and short fashion each other.
Yeah, it's all connected.
I had literally never stopped to consider that you cannot have a concept of success unless you simultaneously invent the concept of failure.
You mathematically can't. And what's fascinating is that the neuroscience of human perception actually backs this up perfectly.
Wait, really? Neuroscience?
Yeah. Our brains are basically contrast detection machines. You don't feel the temperature of a room unless it's significantly hotter or colder than your skin.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's true.
You only perceive a sound if it stands out from the background silence. So the author is taking this biological reality and applying it to our moral and social judgments.
Right.
If a society becomes totally obsessed with defining what is beautiful, they have, by definition, necessitated the creation of the ugly.
Because if every single human being looked exactly the same, the word beauty would vanish from the dictionary. It just wouldn't mean anything.
Precisely the point. Our entire emotional lives are often held hostage by these artificial contrasts. We torture ourselves over whether we're successful or falling behind without realizing that these are entirely relative constructs.
We fabricated the measuring stick, and now we're just beating ourselves with it.
Exactly. The eternal Tao, the underlying reality, it contains both the long and the short, the high and the low, without any judgment.
Okay, but, and here's where I hit a massive wall in the reading. If all our goals and judgments are just artificial contrasts, how on earth are you and I supposed to actually live?
It's a fair question.
Because we still have to pay rent, right? We have to manage teams, navigate the modern world. And the text concludes that because of this relativity, the sage manages affairs without doing anything and conveys his instructions without the use of speech.
Yeah, that's a tough pill to swallow for a modern reader.
I mean, I'm sorry, but if you attempt to manage affairs without doing anything on a Tuesday morning at a modern tech company, you aren't a sage. You are unemployed.
Yeah, security is walking you out of the building. But the resistance you're feeling to that phrase is completely natural because not doing anything sounds to the modern English ear like apathy or just severe negligence.
It sounds like being incredibly lazy.
Right. But the concept being introduced here is Wu-Wei, which is much better understood as effortless action or non-forcing. It's rooted deeply in the physics of that duality we just discussed.
Okay, unpack that for me. How does physics relate to not working?
Think about Newton's third law. For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. The author is basically applying this law to human psychology and social dynamics.
Oh, so when I push incredibly hard to force a specific outcome, I am automatically generating an equal amount of pushback.
Yes, exactly. When you strive, scheme, and try to impose your rigid, egotistical will onto a complex situation, whether that's a massive project at work or even just a personal relationship, you create friction. You provoke resistance.
You make people want to fight you.
Precisely. Wu-Wei is the art of recognizing the natural grain of a situation and moving with it, rather than trying to aggressively sand against the grain.
Okay, let me see if I have the mechanics of this right. It's like trying to smooth out the surface of water in a bathtub.
Okay, I like where this is going.
If the water is all rippled and choppy, and you try to force it to be still by pressing your hands down hard on it, your interference just creates more chaos. You make more waves. The only mechanical way to achieve the outcome of smooth water is to withdraw your hands and stop touching it. Just leave it alone.
That analogy captures the mechanism beautifully. Action through non-interference. It's not that you're paralyzed or lazy. It's that you recognize when your forced intervention is the very thing causing the turbulence.
Because my need to control it is making it worse.
Right. And the text takes this a step further in chapter 10 when it describes the mysterious quality of someone who is aligned with this flow. It says they produce and nourish things without claiming ownership.
Oh, this part. Yes.
It says they do everything without boasting, and they preside over all without controlling them.
Producing without possessing. I mean, that goes against every survival instinct in the modern corporate playbook.
It really does. It flips it upside down.
If I produce a massive report or I come up with a brilliant marketing strategy, my immediate instinct is to watermark it with my name, CC my boss, and make sure literally everyone knows I did it.
You want the ROI on your effort.
I want the credit. Why would anyone willingly give up the ownership of their own hard work?
Well, to answer that, we have to look at the psychological toll that claiming ownership actually takes on you.
The toll? What do you mean?
Think about it. When you demand credit, your ego becomes inextricably attached to the outcome of that project. You now have to defend that idea.
Oh, yeah. If someone critiques it, it feels like they're critiquing me.
Exactly. You have to constantly monitor who praises it, who critiques it, who's trying to steal it. You are suddenly burdened with managing your reputation around this one thing.
It's exhausting.
It is. By producing the work and immediately stepping back, by not letting your ego wrap its tentacles around the result, you remain incredibly free. You nourish the project, you set the conditions for it to succeed, but you don't strangle it with your need for validation.
That makes a lot of sense. But this philosophy wasn't just written for personal inner peace, was it?
No, not entirely.
Because the author keeps referring to the sage managing affairs, which sounds a lot like political leadership. I think we need to look at the historical context, because they were writing this during a time of extreme social turbulence, right?
They absolutely were. Much of this text is directed at a ruler managing a state, likely during a period of really intense conflict, fracturing alliances, and just massive societal greed.
So it was a chaotic time.
Very chaotic. The author was looking at a society tearing itself apart and diagnosing the root cause. And the diagnosis is deeply unsettling because it attacks the very foundations of how we structure our societies today.
I definitely felt that gut punch when I was reading chapter 3, because it directly addresses how a leader should govern. And it says, get this, not to value and employ men of superior ability is the way to keep the people from rivalry among themselves.
Yeah, that's a tough one to read today.
Let's just pause right there. Do not value superior ability? Our entire modern educational and economic system is built on doing exactly that.
We call it meritocracy.
Right. We test for superior ability, we rank it on a curve, we reward it with wealth, and we put the winners on magazine covers.
We do, and we view it as a fundamental moral good. But look at the causal chain the author is actually exposing here. What is the psychological byproduct of a society that worships the best and brightest?
I guess you create a lot of losers.
You instantly create a vast majority of people who feel inadequate. You breed intense, desperate rivalry. The text continues this exact logic. Not to prize articles which are difficult to procure is the way to keep them from becoming thieves. Not to show them what is likely to excite their desires is the way to keep their minds from disorder.
The mechanism of manufactured desire. It's like the diamond industry.
Okay, how so?
Well, for most of human history, a diamond was just a very hard, somewhat shiny rock. But the moment a massive marketing apparatus decided to tell society, hey, this rare rock is the ultimate symbol of love and status, people started spending months of their salary on it.
Right. The scarcity created the value.
People started stealing them. People literally started fighting wars over them. And it's all because the culture hyped it up.
That's spot on. The author is arguing that the leader, by elevating certain people or rare, shiny things on a pedestal, is actively manufacturing the conditions for societal collapse.
Wow.
If the leader doesn't model an obsession with rare jade or gold, the citizen doesn't lose sleep plotting how to acquire it. By celebrating the extraordinary, a culture inadvertently normalizes desperation for everyone else.
That is so deep. The people lose their peace of mind because they're constantly striving for artificial, culturally constructed markers of success.
Precisely.
So the ancient cure for societal anxiety is to basically stop hyping everything up. I actually follow that logic. But if the leader isn't supposed to champion the best or reward the exceptional, how do they actually govern?
Well, they have a different model entirely.
Because the text gets really, really dark on this point. It points to nature as the ultimate model in chapter 5. And it says, heaven and earth do not act from any wish to be benevolent. They deal with all things as the dogs of grass are dealt with.
Yes, the famous straw dogs passage.
And then it applies this directly to the leader. The sages do not act from any wish to be benevolent. They deal with the people as the dogs of grass are dealt with. I have to throw a massive red flag here.
She don't blame you.
Treating people like dogs of grass. That sounds like a sociopathic disregard for human life. It sounds terrible.
It is incredibly jarring to modern sensibilities, especially in our culture that expects leaders to be, endlessly empathetic and benevolent all the time. But we have to understand what the dogs of grass or straw dogs actually were.
Okay, what were they?
There were actual effigies used in ancient religious rituals. Before and during the ritual, these straw dogs were treated with the utmost reverence. They were placed on altars, they were decorated, offered sacrifices.
So they were highly valued.
Yes, for a time. But the very second the ritual ended, they were tossed into the street and literally trampled into the dirt by passersby.
See, that sounds even worse. That sounds like the ultimate definition of being used and discarded. Like, I will revere you when you serve my purpose, But the minute I don't need you, you are literal garbage to me.
I get why it sounds that way. The metaphor is provocative on purpose. But we have to read it through the lens of profound impartiality, not malice. Look at the first half of that statement again. Heaven and earth do not act from any wish to be benevolent.
Right.
Think about the mechanics of nature. A rainstorm will water a farmer's crops, ultimately saving his livelihood. But that exact same rainstorm will flood a neighboring valley and destroy homes. Does the rain love the farmer and hate the valley?
No, it's just rain.
Exactly. Nature operates according to vast impersonal laws. It doesn't play favorites. It doesn't perform forced benevolence.
It doesn't have an emotional agenda.
Yeah.
Like the sun doesn't shine harder on good people and dim itself for bad people. It just shines.
Just shines. So when the text says the sage treats people like straw dogs, it means the sage governs without emotional favoritism, without a savior complex, and without the desperate need to be perceived as a good person.
Oh, interesting.
Forced benevolence, trying to constantly play the hero, or showering one specific group with favors inevitably creates imbalance and resentment in the rest of the system. The wise leader maintains an objective distance, allowing the natural cycles of society to play out without frantic, egotistical interference.
The author gives us another analogy right after the straw dogs to explain this kind of impartial power. They compare the space between heaven and earth to a bellows.
Yes, the tool you use to pump air into a fire.
Right. It says the bellows is empty, yet its power is inexhaustible.
Because a bellows only works because it is empty. If you stuffed a bellows completely full of rocks or wool, it would be utterly useless. It couldn't draw in air, and it couldn't produce wind.
Right. It has to have space to function.
Exactly. The author is suggesting that nature, and the ideal leader, operates from a place of vast, uncluttered capacity. They hold nothing back, they possess no rigid personal agenda, and therefore they can respond endlessly to whatever the present moment actually requires.
So it's not a stagnant emptiness. It's an active, spacious capacity, like how an empty room has the potential to host a dance, a business meeting, or a dinner.
Yes.
But if the room is packed floor to ceiling with boxes, it has zero potential. It can't be anything other than a storage closet.
That is a perfect extension of the concept, and I think this transitions us from the ancient political sphere directly into our modern daily lives. Because while most of us listening aren't, ruling agrarian states, the psychological traps of rivalry, the exhaustion of forced benevolence, and the clutter of our own desires, those are the defining characteristics of modern burnout.
That's the perfect pivot, because reading chapters 7, 8, and 9 felt like finding a 2,500-year-old antidote to modern hustle culture.
It really does read like that.
The way this text challenges how we build our careers and seek fulfillment is just staggering. Chapter 7 observes that heaven and earth endures precisely because they do not live of or for themselves.
Right.
Therefore, the text advises the sage puts his own person last, and yet it is found in the foremost place. He treats his person as if it were foreign to him, and yet that person is preserved.
It is a breathtaking paradox.
It's totally counterintuitive.
It is. If you desperately want to be foremost, the text says the strategy is to put yourself last. If you are terrified of losing yourself, the strategy is to stop obsessing over your own preservation.
Which flies in the face of an economy that literally screams at us to build our personal brand, monetize our hobbies, and constantly put ourselves out there.
Yeah, we're told we have to be the loudest in the room.
Right. We are told that if we don't aggressively advocate for ourselves, we will be crushed by the competition. But this ancient wisdom whispers, hey, step to the back of the line. It's much safer. And ironically, you'll endure much longer back there. So what is the actual mechanism making that true? Why does putting yourself last lead to preservation?
Well, it fundamentally removes the target from your back. Think about the physics of resistance we discussed earlier with Wu-Wei.
Okay, the Newton's third law thing.
Exactly. The person who is constantly shouting, look at me, I'm the best, I deserve this promotion, I'm the smartest, they are generating a massive amount of social friction. They are forcing everyone around them to either submit to their ego or challenge it.
Yeah, it makes you want to take them down a peg.
Naturally. But by treating your own person as if it were foreign, meaning you don't take your ego so seriously, you aren't constantly defensive, you don't demand the spotlight, you bypass all that resistance, people naturally trust and elevate someone who isn't overtly trying to dominate them.
Oh, you become untargetable.
Exactly.
And nothing illustrates this strategy of yielding better than chapter 8. Which contains probably the most famous metaphor in the entire text.
Oh, absolutely. The water metaphor.
Right. It says, the highest excellence is like water. and it explains why. The excellence of water appears in its benefiting all things and in its occupying, without striving, the low place which all men dislike.
Water is the ultimate physical embodiment of Wu-Wei. It completely surrenders to gravity. It never fights its environment. It conforms perfectly to whatever vessel holds it.
But its power lies in its humility.
Yes.
It seeks the lowest ground. It flows into the gutters, the crevices, the muddy depressions, like the exact places that humans try to avoid.
Yeah.
We are conditioned to climb the ladder, to seek the penthouse, to get to the high places.
Right. Everyone wants the corner office with the view.
Exactly. Water goes to the basement. But because it goes to the lowest places, it ends up nourishing the roots of absolutely everything.
And over time, that soft, yielding, downward-flowing substance will literally cut through solid granite. Look at the Grand Canyon you mentioned earlier.
Wow, yeah. Carved by water.
When we map this onto our modern lives, finding power in yielding and occupying the spaces others overlook is a profound strategy. When you aren't fighting everyone for the microphone on the stage, you have the quiet freedom to actually do the deep, meaningful work behind the scenes.
Because nobody is bothering you.
Exactly. As the chapter concludes, when one does not wrangle about his low position, no one finds fault with him.
You become bulletproof because you refuse to enter the arena where people are firing shots.
Exactly.
But our culture doesn't just push us to climb, right? It pushes us to maximize. We want to be at 100% capacity at all times. This brings us to Chapter 9, which feels like a direct warning to the modern optimizer.
Chapter 9 is a brilliant critique of accumulation. It starts with a very physical reality. It says, it is better to leave a vessel unfilled than to attempt to carry it when it is full. If you keep feeling a point that has been sharpened, the point cannot long preserve its sharpness.
This reminds me so much of how we treat our digital lives today. We are terrified of leaving any margin.
Oh, absolutely. The calendar has to be packed.
We optimize our calendars so there isn't a single 15-minute gap. We over-engineer our productivity systems until they require more time to manage than the actual work itself. We are literally carrying a vessel filled to the absolute brim.
And what happens when a vessel is that full?
Exactly. When a vessel is 100% full, the slightest bump in the road, a traffic jam, a delayed email, a sick kid, it spills everything. The whole system just crashes.
That is a highly relevant modern translation. Over-sharpening the blade actually makes it brittle. It ruins the edge. And the text applies this to material and social success as well. When gold and jade fill the hall, their possessor cannot keep them safe.
More stuff, more problems.
The accumulation of wealth, honors, and the resulting arrogance brings its own destruction. Because the more you amass, the more real estate you have to protect, and the more paranoid and anxious you become. The weight of your own success becomes the very thing that crushes you.
So how do we stop the cycle? How do we avoid being crushed by our own ambition?
The text offers a radical, almost unthinkable solution for the modern achiever at the end of Chapter 9. It says, when the work is done and one's name is becoming distinguished, to withdraw into obscurity is the way of heaven.
Withdrawing into obscurity. I mean, imagine pulling off the biggest project of your career, hitting every metric, and instead of taking a victory lap on LinkedIn or demanding a massive raise, you just quietly step back.
You fade right into the background.
You let the work exist without you.
It is the ultimate cure for burnout because it breaks that endless cycle of leveraging past success for future pressure. You do the work, you finish the work, and you detach.
I find this deeply appealing on a conceptual level. The philosophy of water, of the unfilled vessel, of stepping into obscurity, it sounds like a profound release. But let's bring this down to earth for a minute. Let's get deeply practical for you, the listener.
Yes, let's look at the how-to.
Because it's one thing to philosophize about water flowing downward while you're sitting on a meditation cushion. It is entirely different to embody this on a chaotic Thursday afternoon when your inbox is exploding, your team is arguing, and a deadline is looming.
You are pointing out the critical gap between understanding a philosophy intellectually and actually practicing it. Thankfully, the text does not leave us purely in the abstract. If we comb through these chapters, we can extract very specific, actionable instructions.
Okay, lay them on me.
Let's start with Chapter 4 as our first practical exercise. The text advises us to blunt our sharp points and unravel the complications of things. We should temper our brightness and bring ourselves into agreement with the obscurity of others.
Okay, I'm going to challenge that specific instruction right away, because tempering our brightness and agreeing with the obscurity of others sounds dangerously close to playing small.
What do you mean?
Well, am I supposed to dumb myself down? If I have a great idea in a meeting, or if I am genuinely highly skilled at my job, am I supposed to hide my light just so I don't outshine my coworkers. Because suppressing your own talents just to make other people comfortable sounds like a recipe for deep, deep resentment.
That is a very perceptive pushback and a really common misunderstanding of this passage. But we have to link this back to the core mechanics of friction we discussed earlier. Blunting your sharp points is not about pretending to be incompetent.
Okay, so what is it about?
Your intellect and your talents are powerful tools, but if they're constantly protruding, you're going to poke people. You're going to create defensive reactions. This practice is about dropping the ego's desperate need to prove it is the smartest in the room at all times.
Okay, let me visualize this. It's the difference between the person in the meeting who listens to a colleague's idea and immediately says, yeah, that's good, but actually my idea does it better because of X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
Versus the person who listens, clearly sees the flaw in the logic, but gently guides the group to discover the solution without having to stamp their own signature on it.
Precisely. The first person is flashing their brightness, blinding everyone, and creating a combative dynamic. Tempering your brightness means you don't need to blind people with your brilliance in every single interaction.
You don't have to win the meeting.
Right. And unraveling complications means you stop adding unnecessary drama or ego-driven complexity to a situation. You allow others to feel safe and comfortable in your presence. It's a massive dropping of armor, and frankly, it saves you an incredible amount of emotional energy.
That reframes it entirely. It's not hiding your light, it's putting a lampshade on it so people can actually sit in the room with you without squinting.
I like that, yes.
I really like that.
Yeah.
So practice 1, blunt the point. Stop trying to win every interaction. What is the second practice?
It comes from Chapter 8, returning to the metaphor of water. But the text also lists the highest excellence in various domains of human life. It states that the excellence of the mind is in its abysmal stillness, and the excellence of movement is in its timeliness.
Abysmal stillness. That is an intense phrase. It implies a stillness that is deep, dark, and almost bottomless, like an abyss.
Exactly. It refers to a depth of calm that cannot be disturbed by surface-level turbulence. Think of the ocean. A massive hurricane can be tearing the surface apart, tossing ships around, but a mile down, the water is perfectly, abysmally still.
Untouched by the storm.
Right. Practice 2 is about cultivating that space before you act. When the inbox explodes, the modern instinct is to react frantically, to flail at the surface. This practice demands that you drop into the stillness first. Wait.
Because movement out of panic is usually the wrong move.
Yes. Movement and action are only truly effective when they possess timeliness, when they are deployed at the exact right moment, rather than rushed out of fear.
Which flows perfectly into the third practice, because if we need to find that abysmal stillness, Chapter 10 gives us the literal, physical mechanism to do it. It might be the most practical advice in the whole text.
Let's hear it.
It asks, when one gives undivided attention to the vital breath and brings it to the utmost degree of pliancy, he can become as a tender babe. When he has cleansed away the most mysterious sights of his imagination, he can become without a flaw.
This is a profound diagnostic tool for the modern listener. We really have to analyze what the mysterious sights of the imagination actually are. From a psychological standpoint, this perfectly describes the mechanics of human anxiety.
It's the brain's projection machine.
Yes.
We sit at our desks, we are completely physically safe, the room is quiet, but our imagination is projecting a vivid 4K movie of our boss yelling at us, our company going bankrupt, and us living under a bridge. We are terrified by mysterious sights that do not actually exist in reality.
And your nervous system cannot tell the difference between a real threat and an imagined one.
It really can't.
If you imagine the disaster vividly enough, your body pumps cortisol and adrenaline into your bloodstream. You become rigid, tense, and defensive. The ancient practice to break this neurological loop is to cleanse those sites by redirecting your undivided attention to the physical reality of the vital breath.
Because breathing only happens right now.
Exactly. The breath anchors you to the only place where those imagined horrors do not exist, the present moment. By focusing on the breath, you signal to your nervous system that you are safe, allowing you to return to the pliancy and softness of a tender babe, rather than remaining rigid with fear.
I am continually amazed by how scientifically accurate that is. Breathing to literally reset the nervous system. But, and we have to face reality here, actually trying to live this way is going to be incredibly difficult.
No, undoubtedly.
Blunting our sharp points, refusing to take credit, stepping into obscurity, giving up the frantic hustle, trying to execute this in modern society is going to create a massive amount of internal friction for the listener.
It is guaranteed to create friction because you are essentially trying to uninstall the programming that society has been writing into your brain since you were a toddler.
Let's really look at those obstacles to growth. Because from the moment you enter the education system, you are conditioned to be exceptional. You are given gold stars for raising your hand first. You are taught to build a resume of accomplishments that have your name explicitly attached to them. And here we are, unpacking a text that tells you in Chapter 3 to actively not value superior ability.
It's a huge culture shock.
A text that tells you in Chapter 2 to do the work with no expectation of a reward and no resting in it as an achievement. That is not just a different strategy. That is a fundamental threat to the modern identity.
The discomfort you're identifying there is the ego's fear of annihilation. Our modern sense of self is intricately, almost exclusively tied to ownership and external validation.
Like, I am what I do.
Right. I am the person who came up with this idea. I am the manager of this department. I am the owner of this wealth. If you take away the expectation of reward and the claiming of achievements, the ego panics. It asks, if I am not my accomplishments, who am I?
It's like the ego is an overly sensitive car alarm.
Okay, I'm listening.
You built the car, your life, your career, your reputation, and you install this alarm to protect it. But the alarm is so sensitive that every time someone just walks past the car or the wind blows a little too hard, the alarm starts screaming.
And you have to go deal with it.
Exactly. You spend all your time and energy running outside to turn the alarm off, defending your territory. You don't even get to drive the car anymore. You just manage the alarm.
That is a brilliant analogy for modern exhaustion. We spend all our energy managing the alarm, protecting our image, defending our credit, stressing about our status on social media.
It's a full-time job.
It is. And the text is asking you to simply disconnect the alarm. Yes, the silence will feel terrifying at first because you are so used to the noise telling you that you are important. But the value on the other side of that discomfort is profound freedom.
Because if you aren't wrangling for position, you are suddenly free to just do the work for the joy of the work itself.
Exactly. When the ego is removed from the process, your action becomes purer, more focused, and ironically, much more impactful. You aren't wasting 50% of your cognitive load worrying about how the work makes you look.
I am completely sold on the value of letting go of the ego. But in the spirit of acting as honest guides to this text, we cannot gloss over the parts that are highly problematic.
Fair enough.
There is a massive red flag in this text that we have to confront head-on. We touched on Chapter 3 earlier regarding meritocracy, but we really need to look at the second half of that chapter, where it describes the actions of the sage's government.
Yes, the description of how the ideal ruler manages the population.
I'm going to read this verbatim because it is impossible to ignore how jarring it is. It says, "Therefore the sage, in the exercise of his government, empties their minds, fills their bellies, weakens their wills, and strengthens their bones. He constantly tries to keep them without knowledge and without desire, and where there are those who have knowledge, to keep them from presuming to act on it."
It's strong language.
Let's be brutally honest here. Keep them without knowledge, empty their minds, weaken their wills. That is not spiritual wisdom. That is the literal blueprint for authoritarian mind control. Keep the peasants dumb, docile, and well-fed so they don't revolt.
Your reaction is entirely justified, and it highlights the absolute necessity of reading ancient texts with sharp modern discernment. We cannot blindly consume everything on the page. We have to contextualize it.
So what is the context here?
The author was writing in an ancient, feudal, agrarian society. In that specific historical and political reality, a ruler might have genuinely theorized that a simple, uneducated farming population, free from the turbulent desires brought on by complex knowledge, luxury goods, and political ambition, was the only way to maintain a peaceful, stable state.
It's a macro-level ignorance is bliss policy. If they don't know what they're missing, they won't fight over it.
Precisely. But from the vantage point of the 21st century, operating in democratic societies that value human rights and agency, we must unequivocally reject the literal political application of this passage. The deliberate suppression of knowledge and the weakening of human will is recognized universally today as a tool of oppression and tyranny.
So do we just cross this section out? Do we discard it as a relic of a primitive political system?
We discard the literal political application, but we do not throw the baby out with the bathwater. The genius of interacting with ancient wisdom is learning how to translate it. We can extract profound, enduring value from this passage by shifting the domain of application.
Shifting it.
We stop applying it externally to a state, and we start applying it internally to the self.
Wait, okay, let me track this. So in this internal translation, I am the ruler, the sage, and the population or the state that I am governing is my own mind.
Exactly. Think about it. Your internal state is populated by a chaotic citizenry of thoughts, impulses, desires, and anxieties. Now, reread the passage as a manual for self-regulation. What happens when your mind is overflowing with the chaotic trivia of modern life? The endless doom scrolling, the manufactured outrage of the 24-hour news cycle.
You're a wreck. You're totally overwhelmed.
Right. Therefore, the internal sage says, empty your mind. Clear out the noise. Starve the distractions.
Oh, that completely flips it. That makes so much sense. And what about weakening the will? Because that one sounded really bad.
Think about the modern obsession with willpower. We try to force our lives into compliance through sheer white-knuckle determination. We try to control the uncontrollable.
And what happens? We suffer severe burnout.
Exactly. Your internal sage tells you to weaken your will, meaning release your rigid, obsessive cling to control. Soften your demand that the universe bend to your exact specifications.
Wow. And fill their bellies, strengthen their bones. That becomes a mandate to take care of your actual physical foundation.
Yes.
Stop living entirely in your frantic, anxious intellect.
Yeah.
Go eat a good meal. Go for a walk. Strengthen your physical presence in the world instead of hovering above it in a cloud of anxiety.
You've nailed it. And the most controversial line, keeping them without knowledge, becomes a brilliant psychological insight. How often does your intellectual knowledge of all the potential variables, all the statistics, and all the things that could go wrong completely paralyze you?
Oh, constantly. Analysis paralysis.
Keeping your internal state without knowledge means recognizing when over-intellectualizing is preventing you from acting naturally and gracefully.
I love that translation. It takes a passage that looks like a tyrant's playbook on the surface and transforms it into an absolute masterclass on internal self-governance.
It's all about how you apply it.
And this inward pivot, this realization that the ultimate battleground is really the human ego. It feels like a thread that weaves through all of human history. As I was reading these chapters, I kept hearing echoes of completely different traditions.
It is a universal human thread. While we must respect the distinct cosmologies and unique goals of different philosophies, the diagnostic conclusions regarding human suffering are strikingly similar across cultures.
It's like everyone figured out the same bug in the software.
Right. When Chapter 10 talks about cleansing away the mysterious sights of the imagination and returning to the vital breath, you are looking at the foundational mechanics of modern secular mindfulness.
And it deeply mirrors Stoic philosophy as well. When Seneca wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, he was pointing at the exact same neurological glitch that the Tao Te Ching is trying to cure.
Exactly. The human brain is a brilliant survival tool that accidentally tortures us.
Furthermore, when Chapter 9 warns that when gold and jade fill the hall, their possessor cannot keep them safe, we see the universal critique of materialism.
It spans centuries.
Whether you are reading an ancient Chinese mystic, a Roman emperor like Marcus Aurelius, or a modern clinical psychologist studying the hedonic treadmill, the consensus is basically identical. Attempting to solidify your identity through external accumulation is a trap. The heavier your armor, the more exhausted you become carrying it.
The ego is the ultimate bad investment. The more you pour into protecting it, the lower your returns in actual peace and happiness.
But the alternative that this text offers, the path of the unfilled vessel, the path of water seeking the low ground, the path of producing without possessing it, is incredibly humbling.
It demands a lot of surrender.
It does, yet strangely, it takes so much pressure off. You do not have to be the sharpest point in the room. You do not have to carry a vessel filled to the absolute brim. You can just allow yourself to exist in the flow of reality. Which brings us back to that incredibly potent imagery from Chapter 5.
The bellows.
Yes. The space between heaven and earth is like a bellows. It is empty, yet it never collapses. And the more it works, the more wind it produces. Its power is derived entirely from the space it leaves open. It's effective precisely because it isn't cluttered.
It is the ultimate testament to the power of capacity over accumulation.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the first 10 chapters, I want to leave you, the listener, with a question to chew on this week. Where in your life are you desperately trying to be completely full?
Where are you carrying the full vessel?
Right. Where are you over-sharpening the blade, trying to force a specific outcome, or frantically managing the car alarm of your ego to demand credit? What would actually happen if you created just a little bit of intentional emptiness in your schedule or in your need for control over the next few days?
That's a powerful challenge.
If you stop pressing your hands down on the rippled water, would you, like the ancient bellows, actually discover a deeper, more enduring kind of power.
That's the heart of this section. This is wisdom for the present, where understanding leads to clarity, and clarity shapes how we see and live. We'll see you in the next episode.